When Escape from New York hit theaters in 1981, it wasn't just another dystopian sci-fi flick, it was a grim prophecy wrapped in an action movie. Director John Carpenter turned Manhattan into a maximum security prison before the decade even knew what cyberpunk meant. Low budget, real decay, and one anti-hero with an eye patch who changed the genre forever. These are 20 secret facts about Escape from New York, buried in fog, fire, and political fury. Fact 1. John Carpenter didn't write Escape from New York in some creative fever dream. He wrote it in 1976, angry and disillusioned after watching the Watergate scandal unfold on national television. The script was political therapy disguised as science fiction. Carpenter imagined a future where the United States government turned its most famous city into a walled prison, and the American public just accepted it without question. The film asked a darker question than most action movies dared to touch. What happens when you stop trusting your leaders but keep obeying them anyway? Carpenter's answer was Snake Plissken walking through the wreckage. The film premiered 5 years after he finished the script, but its cynicism felt prophetic. Turns out dystopia wasn't science fiction, it was commentary. Fact 2. Before Kurt Russell became the ultimate anti-hero, John Carpenter had another actor in mind. Charles Bronson, the stone-faced action icon known for Death Wish and The Mechanic, was seriously considered for the role of Snake Plissken. Bronson had the gravitas, the presence, and the edge, but Carpenter hesitated. He worried Bronson was too old-school macho, too traditional for what he envisioned. Snake wasn't a righteous vigilante. He was a criminal, a nihilist, someone who didn't care about saving the world. Carpenter needed someone who could embody apathy and danger without leaning into heroism. Kurt Russell, known mostly for Disney comedies like The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, seemed like an insane choice, but Russell wanted to go dark. He shocked everyone by transforming into Snake Plissken and never looked back. That decision redefined his entire career. Fact 3. Despite its title, not a single frame of Escape from New York was filmed in New York City. The production couldn't afford it. Manhattan was expensive, crowded, and logistically impossible for a low-budget dystopian thriller, so Carpenter and his team found something better. East St. Louis, Illinois, a city partially destroyed by fire and urban decay, became the perfect stand-in for a post-apocalyptic prison. Entire city blocks sat abandoned, burned out, and crumbling. It was cheaper, dirtier, and far more convincing than any movie set could have been. The production didn't need to build ruins. They just filmed what was already there. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. America's real decay made the perfect backdrop for Carpenter's fictional nightmare. Sometimes reality is grimmer than any dystopia Hollywood can imagine. Fact 4. The iconic crash scene where Air Force One slams into Manhattan wasn't created with miniatures or expensive effects. John Carpenter and his team found a real DC-3 aircraft rotting in a junkyard. They literally sawed it in half, dragged the pieces onto the street, and turned it into the president's escape pod. It was a DIY special effect born from necessity and budget constraints, but it worked. The wreckage looked real because it was real. The debris scattered across the pavement wasn't rubber or foam. It was actual aircraft metal, glass, and fuselage fragments. At the time, CGI didn't exist. Practical effects were the only option. Carpenter turned that limitation into an advantage. The crash scene became one of the film's most visceral moments. Grounded in physical reality, sometimes the best special effects are the ones you can touch. Fact 5. Cinematographer Dean Cundey wanted a constant haze throughout the film to create atmosphere and hide the low-budget limitations. But East St. Louis didn't have enough electrical infrastructure to power traditional fog machines across entire city blocks. The production team improvised. They borrowed a fire department water pump and rigged it to feed fog machines with enough power to blanket the streets in mist. The result was a perpetual, eerie haze that became one of the film's signature visual elements. That fog wasn't just aesthetic, it was functional. It obscured cheap-set dressing, masked lighting inconsistencies, and created depth in otherwise flat urban landscapes. Cundey's insistence on atmosphere turned a technical limitation into an artistic choice. The fog became as much a character as Snake Plissken himself, wrapping the entire film in a dreamlike nightmare.
That's the Duke. I know the sound of his engines.
Fact 6. The Duke of New York's car, a Cadillac complete with working chandeliers mounted on the hood, wasn't just a prop. Actor Isaac Hayes loved it so much he drove it around off-set between takes. Locals in East St. Louis reported seeing Shaft himself cruising through burned-out city blocks at night in a chandelier-covered luxury car. The surreal image matched the film's absurdist tone perfectly. Hayes didn't just play the Duke, he inhabited the role with theatrical intensity, turning a supporting villain into one of the film's most memorable characters. The car became iconic iconic, a symbol of decadent power in a collapsed society, and Hayes made sure everyone knew it was his. Production assistants had to negotiate with him to get the car back for scheduled scenes. The Duke of New York ruled on screen and off. Fact 7. The studio got cold feet before production even began. Executives read the script and panicked. It depicted a corrupt American government, a police state, and a dystopian future where Manhattan had been turned into a maximum security prison. They feared it was too cynical, too dark, too politically charged for mainstream audiences. Some executives wanted Carpenter to soften the government's portrayal or make the premise less explicitly authoritarian. Carpenter refused. He wouldn't change a word. The script's political edge was the entire point. If they wanted the film, they had to accept its politics. The studio reluctantly moved forward, and Escape from New York became one of the decade's most politically charged cult films. Its cynicism resonated with audiences who were equally disillusioned with authority. Carpenter's refusal to compromise turned a risky gamble into a countercultural touchstone. Fact 8. In the prison scenes, graffiti-covered walls secretly feature the United States Police Force insignia, an emblem John Carpenter designed but never officially explained in dialogue or interviews. Some fans believe it's a subliminal nod to a future authoritarian regime running the country. Others think it represents a militarized police state that replaced traditional law enforcement. The logo appears everywhere once you start looking for it. On uniforms, on walls, on propaganda posters. It's never mentioned, never discussed by characters, never highlighted in the script, but it's there, woven into the visual fabric of the film like a warning sign in a totalitarian state. Carpenter's decision to leave it unexplained adds to the film's unsettling atmosphere. The world of Escape from New York doesn't explain itself. It just exists, oppressive and inescapable. Fact 9. Kurt Russell couldn't actually see through the eye patch during filming, but it wasn't just a costume choice. According to reports, the eye patch was added because Carpenter wanted to hide a visible makeup scar from early test footage. Something went wrong during initial screen tests, leaving Russell with a mark that couldn't be easily corrected. Rather than delay production or spend money on digital fixes that didn't exist yet, Carpenter made the eye patch permanent. The look stuck. What began as an accident became an icon. The eye patch gave Snake Plissken an instantly recognizable silhouette and visual identity. It suggested danger, mystery, and past trauma without needing exposition. Sometimes the best character design comes from solving a problem you never planned for. Snake's eye patch became one of cinema's most famous accessories, born from necessity and turned into legend. Fact 10. When filming the nighttime rescue sequence, a helicopter clipped a bridge cable during a low-altitude pass. It narrowly missed crashing into the crew working below on the street. The pilot struggled to regain control as the aircraft veered dangerously close to buildings and power lines. Everyone on the ground froze, watching the helicopter sway and dip before stabilizing. After that incident, the pilot reportedly refused to fly again for the rest of the shoot. Production had to find a replacement for any remaining aerial shots. The near crash wasn't publicized at the time, but crew members later recalled the terror of watching tons of metal spinning out of control above their heads. No one was hurt, but the margin was razor thin. Escape from New York's chaotic production mirrored the anarchy on screen. Sometimes the danger wasn't scripted.
Attention, you are now entering the debarkation area. No talking, no smoking.
Fact 11. The eerie voice that welcomes prisoners to Manhattan, flat and emotionless, wasn't recorded by a professional voice actor. It was John Carpenter's production assistant, recorded late one night because the studio couldn't afford to hire a professional narrator for such a small role. She read the lines cold, without dramatic inflection, and that emotionless tone accidentally became one of the film's most chilling details. The announcement plays over the opening as Snake Plissken is briefed on his mission. The voice is bureaucratic, clinical, devoid of humanity. It sounds like a government that has stopped pretending to care. Carpenter kept the recording because it perfectly captured the authoritarian indifference he wanted to convey. Sometimes the most unsettling performances are the ones that don't try to perform at all. That production assistant's voice became the sound of dystopia. Fact 12. The MPAA took issue with the violence and bleak tone of Escape from New York. Executives threatened to slap the film with an X rating, which would have killed its theatrical distribution and box office potential. To avoid the rating, Carpenter trimmed just a few seconds of blood and gore from key scenes. Ironically, the cuts made the film even grittier. Your mind filled in the rest. The violence became implied, suggested, lurking just off screen. Carpenter understood that what you don't see is often more disturbing than what you do. The MPAA's censorship forced him to rely on tension and atmosphere instead of explicit carnage. The result was a film that felt more dangerous, not less. The cuts didn't weaken the film, they sharpened it. Sometimes restraint is more brutal than excess. Fact 13. Production designer Joe Alves studied footage from the Attica prison uprising to inform the film's visual aesthetic. The burning trash, graffiti-covered walls, and steel gates came straight from real chaos. Alves wanted the prison to feel authentic, not theatrical. He researched how prisoners actually modify and survive in confinement. The makeshift barriers, the improvised weapons, the territorial graffiti, all of it was grounded in reality. The set design gave Escape from New York a disturbingly authentic look because it wasn't far from reality. Carpenter didn't want a Hollywood prison. He wanted something that felt lived in, desperate, and dangerous. Alves delivered. The production design became one of the film's greatest strengths, turning East St. Louis into a believable nightmare. Fiction borrowed from fact and the line blurred. Fact 14. That glowing digital map of Manhattan in the opening sequence wasn't computer generated in the modern sense. It was hand animated frame by frame on an Apple II computer, one of the earliest personal computers available at the time. The primitive technology gave the map a stark digital look that felt futuristic in 1981. Escape from New York technically featured one of cinema's first digital sequences, even if the technology was laughably basic by today's standards. The map became iconic, a visual shorthand for dystopian future films that followed. It was cheap, effective, and visually distinct. Carpenter embraced the limitations of the technology and turned them into style. The glowing wireframe of Manhattan became as recognizable as Snake Plissken himself. Sometimes innovation comes from working with what you have, not what you wish you had. Fact 15. The interior of the US Police Force headquarters, supposedly representing the White House Command Center, was actually reused from another film. It was the same set built for the Blues Brothers, redressed with monitors, dim lighting, and futuristic props. Carpenter's secret was simple: recycle Hollywood's excess to build his dystopia. No one watching the film would know. The set looked completely different under Carpenter's direction. The Blues Brothers had used it for comedy. Carpenter used it for oppression. The same walls, the same floors, but a completely different tone. It was efficient, cost-effective, and invisible to audiences. Carpenter understood that filmmaking is as much about resourcefulness as creativity. Why build a new set when someone else already paid for one? Hollywood waste became dystopian decor. Fact 16. Kurt Russell's tight leather costume wasn't just for looks. The chest plates were lined with foam Kevlar to protect him during stunt scenes. It was a safety measure disguised as costume design, and only a few crew members knew it existed. Russell performed many of his own stunts, running through explosions, climbing debris, and fighting in chaotic action sequences. The hidden armor kept him safe without breaking the visual aesthetic. Ironically, Snake's fashion statement was real body armor. The costume became one of the most iconic outfits in action cinema, sleek and dangerous. But underneath the style was practical protection. Russell wasn't just dressed like a tough guy, he was actually armored like one. The costume worked on two levels, visual and functional. Sometimes the best designs serve multiple purposes. Fact 17. Those landmines Snake dodges during the bridge sequence weren't just sparks and lights. The effects team used real mini charges to create authentic debris and flame. Kurt Russell's stunt double had to memorize every single step. One wrong move and the explosions would hit him. There was no room for error. The choreography was precise, rehearsed dozens of times before they committed to filming. Once the charges were set, there were no second takes. The explosives would detonate in sequence, and the stunt performer had to navigate the minefield perfectly. The result was one of the film's most tense sequences, grounded in real danger. You can feel the stakes because the stakes were real. Carpenter's commitment to practical effects gave Escape from New York a visceral intensity that CGI can't replicate. The danger wasn't simulated, it was choreographed. Fact 18. Originally, Snake Plissken was supposed to hand over the real tape to the president, completing the rescue mission and walking away. But Carpenter rewrote the ending at the last minute. He realized Snake would never play by the rules. The character wouldn't save the government that imprisoned him, so Carpenter changed the final scene. Snake destroys the tape and walks into the darkness, leaving the president with nothing. It turned the ending from a rescue story into an act of rebellion. Snake didn't just escape from New York, he escaped from the entire system. The rewrite transformed the film's meaning. It became a story about refusing authority, rejecting heroes, and choosing chaos over compliance. That final image of Snake disappearing into the night became one of the most iconic endings in action cinema, all because Carpenter trusted his instincts. Fact 19. There's a deleted 10-minute prologue showing Snake Plissken robbing a bank and getting arrested. It explained why he was sent to Manhattan and provided backstory for his criminal past. Carpenter cut it for pacing. He realized the film worked better starting in media res, dropping audiences directly into the mission action without exposition. The missing scene finally surfaced decades later when special editions were released. Fans couldn't believe how dark it was. Snake wasn't just an anti-hero, he was a violent criminal, methodical and ruthless. The prologue would have changed audience perception, making Snake less sympathetic. Carpenter made the right choice. By cutting the opening, he let Snake remain mysterious. The audience had to accept him without understanding him. That ambiguity made the character stronger. Sometimes what you don't show matters more than what you do. Fact 20. When Escape from New York premiered in 1981, crime in Manhattan was already at record highs. Violent crime, muggings, and urban decay were daily realities, but the film's premise seemed absurd. Turning the entire island into a prison? Impossible. Yet by 1988, just 7 years later, New York City actually started closing off some streets at night in high crime areas. Police barricades went up, certain neighborhoods became no-go zones after dark. The parallels to Carpenter's fictional dystopia were unsettling. The film wasn't predicting the future, it was extrapolating the present. Carpenter looked at what was already happening and pushed it one step further. Sometimes fiction doesn't invent the future, it just sees it first. Escape from New York became a cultural artifact, a warning about what happens when cities collapse and governments stop caring. The prophecy wasn't science fiction, it was uncomfortably close to reality. Escape from New York wasn't just a movie, it was a blueprint for every dystopian action film that followed. Low budget, real decay, and one anti-hero with an eye patch who made rebellion look effortless. Snake Plissken didn't save the world, he walked away from it, and that refusal became the most heroic act of all, because sometimes the truth in Hollywood isn't written in scripts, it's hidden in the reels, buried in the fog, and whispered in deleted scenes.